started Debian, and I've been at Sun now for about a year. And what I'm going to talk about here today is a little bit about what we're doing at Sun around Open Solaris in particular, and why it is that I ended up at Sun in the first place and am doing the things that I'm doing there. So just to explain a little bit of who I am here, I've been a Linux user, developer, and advocate for a very long time, since 1993, about 15 years or so, more or less since the beginning of Linux. I started Debian very shortly after. I found the Linux operating system. It's sort of an interesting story there, and if you think about how people get involved and how people get drawn into Linux and open source, it's because of the community around it, and that drew me in. So, I found all these wonderful things which had happened around Linux almost spontaneously, no master plan. My first thought was, how can I give something back to this community? And Debian was the result of that. Later, I started a company called Progeny, did some commercial things in the Linux space, was at the Linux Foundation where I was a CTO, ran the Linux Standard Base project, and then, as I said, about a year ago, I ended up at Sun, where I ran the operating system strategy for, about 6 or 9 months, and now I'm the Vice President of Developer and Community Marketing, so I'm responsible for developer tools, developer programs, and a bunch of other things. So the question I was asked a whole lot last year after I came to Sun is what's a Linux guy doing at Sun, right? I mean, Sun is not exactly viewed as the most, or at least historically has not exactly been viewed as the most Linux-friendly company in the world, right? I mean, we put all of our chips on Solaris, and we're competing with Linux. And so what exactly are you doing at Sun? I heard this question numerous times. And the answer to me is pretty simple. When you talk about Linux, you're not talking about Linux, right? You're not talking about the kernel, which is actually what Linux is. You're talking about the broader software environment that has been built around the Linux kernel. Right? You're talking about the userland, the open source userland code, the Mozilla Firefox, the OpenOffice, the various things that have been aggregated around the Linux kernel to form a complete operating system. You're talking about the business model that vendors such as Red Hat have built around this complete operating system. The fact that you have flexibility and choice in terms of how you take this complete operating system and deploy it, and the sorts of things that you can do with it. In short, they're talking about the Linux distribution. They're not talking about Linux itself. So when you think about it in this sort of broader context, what's a Linux guy doing at Sun? I'm not really a Linux guy, I'm more of an open source guy. Right? I'm a Linux distribution guy. I think about how you aggregate this open source software together, form a complete package, build a business model around it, and ultimately deliver this highly complex world of open source software to a much broader audience. That's exactly what Debian was all about in the first place. Right? So drilling down a bit more, when I talk about Linux in this broader sense of the word and compare it with Solaris, which of course is something that I've spent a lot of the past year thinking about, how do these two things compare? Right? So how does Linux make sense in the context of Sun and Solaris? Well, if you think about Linux in the broader sense, again, as this collection of open source technology around the Linux kernel, well, that's basically what Solaris is too. Right? So Solaris, starting from the top, is sort of the most user-visible components. Solaris ships with all of those open source applications that you've come to expect from Linux. Right? Mozilla Firefox, Mozilla Thunderbird, OpenOffice, down the stack, same desktop environment, same graphic subsystem, even further down the stack. Same, maybe different implementation, but same interfaces. Right? GNU's not Unix. Right? Same basic concepts there. Now, where we really start to differentiate is down at the kernel level. Right? Linux kernel, Solaris kernel, two very different animals. Right? And this, when we talk about operating system innovation and the sorts of things that we do at Sun, this is where we drive innovation into the operating system marketplace. Right? This is where you find technologies like ZFS. Right? ZFS is the zettabyte file system, which has some extraordinary capabilities in terms of performance and scalability and security, combines file system concepts with volume management concepts in a very easy-to-use, easy-to-administer fashion. Dtrace is another technology that you hear about a lot, an observability framework which allows you to, as a developer, understand what's happening down at the operating system level. How is your program interacting with the operating system? How do you find bottlenecks in how your application is performing? right? So think about it in the broader sense, right? Linux, Solaris, they really aren't all that different. Now, in terms of structure, they are very different. Right, so a view of Linux distributions is on the right here. So all of this open source software in the open source community, essentially a cloud, an ecosystem of open source technology brought together by the various Linux distributions, Red Hat, SUSE, Debian, Ubuntu, right, pulling all of these technologies together, delivering them to market in a complete package. Right, well, Solaris is that complete package. Right, so Solaris, at least in the traditional sense, Solaris 10 and before, has been more of a box. Right? It's a monolithic product. We do all sorts of innovations in the Solaris operating system. I mentioned ZFS and dtrace. And more recently, as the market has moved to open source technology, we've begun to incorporate more and more of this open source technology from the cloud on the right into the Solaris operating system. But you'll see that in this current structure, the amount of software, open source software, we've been able to provide has been necessarily limited. And in fact, if you talk to users of Solaris, one of the common complaints that you'll hear from them is, my favorite open source application isn't there. If it is there, it may be slightly out of date. And it's because we have two different, we have an old model which works very well for innovation that Sun drives, but works far less well for capturing innovation that happens in the open source community, ultimately integrating those two things together. Right, so where we want to go with Solaris looks something like this. Right, where we have this core compatible platform where Sun can innovate, where Sun can do things like ZFS and dtrace and work with the broader community to do those sorts of innovations, and also bring together the broader open source technology that the world has come to refer to as Linux. You know, whether it's OpenOffice or Apache, MySQL, Perl, Python. So how do we bring the best of both worlds together? Right? The core innovation that Sun and the communities around Sun technology can bring to the market with this broader innovation that the open source community is delivering as well. Right, so for those of you who have heard about Project Indiana, this is the essence of Project Indiana. How do we build that best of both worlds? How do we combine Solaris innovation with this distribution model that's come out of the Linux world? Right? How do we make Solaris into a distribution in the Linux sense of the word? Right? So the result of this work has been this Project Indiana, which is a project that's happened in the Open Solaris community over the past 9 months or so, which is breaking down that monolithic structure around Solaris, making it into a more of a modular, componentized operating system, comprised of a core, a very small core operating system, that fits on a single CD, which is easy to download, easy to install, and then a set of package repositories around that core operating system, delivering both Sun innovation, Sun technology, and non-Sun technology from the open source community. Right, so two big themes of Project Indiana over the past 9 months or so. First of all, one is closing what I call the familiarity gap. Right? There's a lot more people in the world that know how Linux works than know how Solaris works. And again, Linux in this broader sense of the term, open source. Right? So how do we make Solaris easier to acquire, easier to install? How do we better integrate some of this open source technology from the GNU project and others? How do we add a package management system to hold all these pieces together and make it easy for people who know how Linux works to install and upgrade their systems? Right? People who have been using Linux for years, they think of dropping down to the command line, apt-get install, whatever they can possibly think of, pull it down, full dependency resolution. We now have that capability in Solaris as well. Now, the second big focus is on the unique capabilities that Solaris brings to the market. Right? So if essentially all we do in Project Indiana is replicate the Linux distribution model around Solaris, take Linux distribution, pull out the Linux kernel, put in the Solaris kernel, it's not terribly interesting, is it? Right? So as we have thought about how we move forward here, both in terms of closing the familiarity gap and in terms of further innovation that we do at Sun, and we think about what is unique about Solaris and how can we bring that to the forefront. So a couple of examples here. Right, we've added a package management system. Right? Package management, for anyone who has used Linux, is absolutely beautiful when it works. Right? You log into your server, you run apt-get upgrade or yum upgrade or whatever command you use to upgrade it, pulls down all your software, all your dependencies. Everything basically gets done in one operation. But every once in a while, the upgrade breaks, and you have to unwind what's happened. You have to pull it apart. You basically have a long weekend ahead of you. And so there's been a variety of efforts over the years to implement essentially rollback or unupgrade, right? Okay, I just upgraded this. It didn't quite turn out the way I was expecting. How do I go back to the state my system was in before I did the upgrade, right? It's actually turned out to be very difficult to implement this directly in the package system, right? How do you know that this part of the system changed as a result of the upgrade versus something else? Well, one of the capabilities that ZFS has is the ability to snapshot the file system and roll back to a previous state. And so by building on top of ZFS, we have a package system which is able to roll back, to unupgrade in the event that the upgrade goes wrong. dtrace. I mentioned dtrace, a developer facility debugging observability framework that allows you to understand where your application is spending time in the operating system, allows you to find performance bottlenecks and so forth. So how do we expose that technology up the stack so that it's not just an operating system facility, but if you're a developer, you're building out your application in a higher level framework like PHP, Python, Ruby, how do you take advantage of these dtrace capabilities? And the fundamental reason we're interested in doing this and why this is such an important part of what we're doing is if you're one of those developers and you're developing in Ruby, and Ruby is your entire world, or Python is your entire world, or PHP is your entire world, what does it matter what operating system is sitting underneath it? Is it Linux? Is it Solaris? Is it Windows? Well, if you have a capability like dtrace that's only available in Solaris, then it does matter, and we can make a much more compelling case that Solaris is something you should look at if you're a developer or deploying an application. Okay, so in terms of how all of this is coming in tangible form, how can you get your hands on it? We have a booth down the row here. We're handing out Developer Preview 2 CDs. So complete environment, easy installation, package system. We have a demo of the release candidate, and we'll be releasing this in May, so next month, at just across the street here at Community One. And if you want to get it now, you can either get it there, you can go to opensolaris.org and learn a bit more about what we're doing. Okay, so why are we doing what we're doing? This is where I get into the industry trends part. So why is Sun fundamentally changing the way that Solaris is built, managed, messaged, right? Solaris is a tremendously successful operating system, and Solaris runs at the heart of so many data centers. It's the absolute pinnacle of scalability, performance, reliability, but the market's fundamentally changing, right? So Solaris does very well in what I call a top-down deployment scenario, where you have a technology problem that you need to solve, you form committees, you have budgets, there are requests for proposals. We do very well in that environment. We do very well in the enterprise space. But there's a whole new market emerging, much more of a bottom-up structure, right? And this is basically how Linux got into the enterprise. This is how PCs got into the enterprise. You have developers, you have system administrators, they have problems they need to solve. And as the cost of technology has come down, both in terms of hardware and software, I mean, think about it. You can go download just about any piece of software you want from the internet and not pay a vendor anything. You can go get a server for $500 and deploy it, or you probably have 5 or 10 of these things sitting in a corner. Right? So what happens is you have problems to be solved. You now have the tools at your disposal to solve them. You can put solutions into production without having to go through these top-down requests for proposal, allocate budget, et cetera, processes. Right? And what do developers and technologists like to do? They like to work around those kinds of heavyweight processes anyway. So this is how Linux got into the enterprise, right? You got a bunch of people. They want to set up a print server or a file server. Hey, I used Red Hat or Debian in college. I know where to go get it. We've got these spare PCs sitting over in the corner. We can set up this thing. We don't have to get anybody's approval, right? And one day the CIO wakes up and says, He didn't say in 1999, I got to go get me some Linux. He woke up one day and Linux was already everywhere, and he had to figure out how to incorporate it into his data center. Right? What is my Linux strategy? Why do I need a Linux strategy? Not because some marketing guy convinced me I need one, but because I already have it. I got to figure out how to deal with it. Right? So this is an area where Sun has not been strong. Right? How many developers think, I'm going to go download Solaris and I'm going to go put it on a machine? Right? So we have to have a much more compelling story in this bottom-up deployment space if we're going to be successful, as successful in 5 years as we have been previously with Solaris 10. Okay, so how is this coming to market? Right, if you're a Solaris user today, if you're on Solaris 10 or before, this basically doesn't change your world at all. Right? Solaris is the top-down delivery mechanism for the Solaris platform, into the enterprise, into the data center, all the things that you've come to expect around Solaris from Sun, the unmatched level of support, the long release cycles, and so forth, will remain. What we're doing here is adding a second delivery mechanism for Solaris technology called Open Solaris. Right? Distribution structure, much more rapidly evolving. This is the delivery mechanism for the latest innovations that we bring into Solaris. It's the latest delivery mechanism for the innovation that the open source community continues to drive. Much shorter release cycle, much more agile development, and much easier to use. This is the thing, if you are familiar with Linux and you want to take advantage of ZFS and dtrace and some of the other capabilities that you've probably read about around Solaris, this is a way for you to do that. And by the way, Sun provides support around Open Solaris as well as Solaris. Right? So you have a place to turn if you put this technology into production and you're successful. Right? You put together an infrastructure, you put it into production, all of a sudden you have the hottest application on the web. Users are hammering your site's falling over. You can pick up the phone and call Sun and get support for it. Okay, so what's next? I've spent a lot of time since I joined Sun a year ago working on Open Solaris, putting this strategy in place, helping to essentially helping to guide Sun as to what it should be doing next around its operating system strategy, and this is the fruit of that work. So where are we going next around open source and beyond? So again, another observation in terms of how the market's evolving. Similar theme that I was talking about earlier. It used to be that you acquired users by acquiring customers. Right? You had large sales forces, large marketing programs, and you'd go out and convince people to buy your technology so that they could adopt it. Now it's much more of an adoption-led market. You go out there, you give your software away, free open source, you get as many people in the world to adopt your technology as possible, and then you sell them something. Right? So this is what our CEO means when he talks about volume drives value. It's why he likes to talk about maps with pink dots, which shows how many millions of copies of Solaris have been downloaded, or millions of copies of NetBeans or Glassfish or OpenOffice or any of our other technologies. These are potential customers for our technology. And how do we get them to pay us something? Because at the end of the day, we're a company, we're in this to make money. We get them to pay us something by giving them something of value, which extends what they've already gotten from us, the free and open source product that they have downloaded, used, put into production. What's the value we bring? We can help you scale that basic deployment into production. We can help you take your business to the next level, whatever it is. And so that's the basic business model at Sun around open source. Right? And we get asked this all the time, particularly not from this group, because I think this group gets it, but from the Wall Street audience. Right? They see that we are the largest open source vendor in the world. Right? We're putting all of our software into open source. It's not all there yet, because it turns out to be rather complicated to take a piece of intellectual property which has been proprietary for 20 years and accumulated all kinds of licensed technology on top of it, to pull that apart and move it out into open source. But we are on the path to open source every single piece of software that we own at Sun. We just spent $1 billion on an open source company. Right? So the financial types will ask us, how do you make money from open source? This is how. Right? We reach the developer community through massive volume. Like, get our technology out there, get it in use in as many places as possible. And then that ultimately feeds into a number of interesting things here on the right. From a software perspective, how do we help you scale it? Right? If you're downloading MySQL, to put together a database server. Every database has storage. Every database runs on a server. Right? Every database has an operating system. Databases are often deployed with identity management and other kinds of middleware. Right? We sell all those things. Right? So this is why we're investing so heavily in open source, because it makes business sense. Okay, so where are we going from here? So I've talked about the open source business model and how we're taking this sort of notion of open source, Open Solaris as a delivery vehicle. How can we broaden that delivery vehicle for not only Sun innovation, but a non-Sun innovation from the open source community? But how does that affect Sun when the developer platforms of choice, right? So think about it, the Ruby, Python, PHP, even things like Amazon Web Services, where you're not even building your own infrastructure, but you're using someone else's. Developer platforms of choice have moved up the stack. And what does that mean to Sun? Where traditional Sun platforms, hardware, storage, operating systems, Java, these things are increasingly invisible infrastructure that live below the technologies that developers live and breathe. Right? So how do we expand this notion of open standards, which we've been talking about for 25 years, through open source, which we're talking about now, the latest manifestation of open standards, into this new world where software is increasingly delivered as a service over a network? Why do developers like these platforms? Because they're simple. Right? Developers like PHP because they don't have to write a whole lot of scaffolding code to get it to work. They like things like Amazon Web Services because they don't have to build servers. They can just write code and get code up and running in a matter of minutes. Right? It's all about lowering barriers to adoption for developers, hiding complexity so that developers can focus on what value they're bringing to market, why the users are going to come to their site. Users aren't going to come to their site because they have a better infrastructure than someone else. They're going to come to their site because they have a more compelling application. Now, if they have an infrastructure they can't scale, they're going to leave, right? So it's all downside. And the upside here for Sun is even though, from a developer perspective, the environments are looking more and more simple, in reality, they're becoming incredibly complex. You think about Google with its millions of servers, right? Yahoo, Microsoft, building data centers all over the world, right? The world of cloud computing, network computing, is becoming incredibly complicated, and Sun knows how this environment works. And we know how to deliver technology that allows these environments to grow and scale. Right, so the opportunities for Sun going forward, and so the little hints that I'll drop here in terms of where we're going. Right? No one owns the web. Right? It's a wonderful thing. Just like no one owns Linux, no one owns open source. And in fact, as I look at the sort of Web 2.0 world, what I see is a lot of interesting things happening. Right? There's a lot of really smart people out there building mashups and doing all these little interesting things. Reminds me a lot of open source and free software in 1993 when I found it. Right? All kinds of interesting, smart people doing interesting things. But fundamentally, in order to tap into all that power of the community, which was that initial draw for me, right? How do you make it? How do you package it up? How do you deliver it to market in a complete package? What is the distribution mechanism? And what did it take in Linux? What did it take in free software and open source? It took the Linux distributions to bring it all together. The Red Hats, the Debians, and so forth, to bring it all together, make it simpler, deliver it to a broader audience. Again, same message around Open Solaris, same message around open source. We're going to be taking that same thinking to this new world. Right? Other opportunities. Think about the new platforms, right? These cloud computing platforms. They're all silos, right? You write your application to Amazon APIs. There's only one place to deploy it. Right? Write your application to Google APIs. There's only one place to deploy it. I mean, haven't we spent the last 10 years moving away from this sort of centralized, siloed model through open source and open standards and other things like that? Sun has been a leader in open standards for 25 years. We're a leader in open source now. How can we take the same leadership position into the new platform world? Right? What does open source mean when software isn't distributed? Right? It means the ability to move your data from one provider to the other. It means the ability to write to a set of APIs that can then be deployed on a number of different platforms. And then finally, because we do have such a strong story in these down-the-stack technologies, operating system, Solaris, Java, and so forth, what role do these technologies play in this new world, right? It's increasingly invisible infrastructure, but as I was saying, the world is vastly more complicated than it was. So in a sense, it's even more important. We just have to make sure that we understand where these two worlds fit together. And the way that I always phrase it is, because I've been in operating systems for the past 15 years, is, do operating systems still matter? Well, sure they do, because without operating systems, nothing else works. So that's my presentation. I don't know how we're doing on time, but why don't we just use the rest of the time for Q&A. Okay, we've got 35 minutes. And there is a mic floating around here.
So is the Open Solaris community going to be kind of mirrored like what they are with Ubuntu when it comes to the release cycles, maybe providing like a long-term support for a particular version of Open Solaris? And is the bugs and the patches, are they going to be available throughout the whole cycle of the Open Solaris, or do you need to go and buy a subscription model and be on the enterprise platform to get the patches?
Yeah, so going forward, Open Solaris will have a 6-month release cycle, so similar to Fedora and Ubuntu. Everything will be free, at least from a core platform perspective. There are various bits that we do not have the rights to redistribute freely. We have various technologies from our partners that we integrate as well. And so the basic model, again, the volume drives value strategy. We want to get Open Solaris out there as broadly as possible. So part of what we've done around Open Solaris has been to remove as many of these barriers to redistribution as possible. With Solaris 10, it's free today. You can go to sun.com and download it. But you have to register, you have to create an account, you have to tell Sun who you are, and we've removed all of those things. You can now share this with your friends on BitTorrent or go to a mirror site and get it. And so in terms of then how this is ultimately going to so if that's the sort of the developer perspective, what's the enterprise perspective? We will be offering at some point a version of Open Solaris that has long-term support available for it. We will be offering support around the Open Solaris 6-month releases, so you can put those into production as well. And the real option that we're opening up here is we have one Solaris platform, one set of technologies here. The real question is, what are you optimizing for? Are you optimizing for something that never changes? In other words, if it never changes, then the likelihood that something bad is going to sneak in is much less. So if you're running a database or something, you probably want to optimize for that. Or are you optimizing for having the latest technology? Right? You see technology as a competitive weapon for your business. And this increasingly characterizes some of the more web-facing environments. Right? Having access to the latest and greatest before the competition is increasingly a competitive advantage. And you're willing to give a little bit in terms of, well, yeah, it changes more often, so it's necessarily going to be a little bit less stable. That's okay, because we have 1 million servers, and if some of them fall over, the user isn't going to notice. Right? So that's the two-tier model that we're moving toward, taking the technology and giving two different options based on optimization points in terms of how people can take advantage of it. Okay. Others? There we go.
Is the Open Solaris packaging system, is that apt-get deb kind of stuff, or is it something new?
Okay, good question. So the Open Solaris package system is new. When I came into the company, the first question I asked is why? Right? Why not just take apt or something else that already exists and use that? Clearly we studied everything. We not only studied the apps and the yums and so forth, but other things like Connery from RPath. ultimately we decided we needed to build our own for a couple of reasons. One, the Solaris platform is very different from Linux in some ways. Right, so I mentioned ZFS. Right, by giving the package system a knowledge of how ZFS works, we've been able to do things in our package system that apt and so forth can't do, such as the rollback feature. We also have, which I didn't talk about, a feature called zones or containers, which is essentially a lightweight virtualization facility, single shared kernel, multiple application environments, so it's useful for application isolation. And it's actually very intelligent in terms of resource sharing. Right? So it can share parts of file systems, it can share other parts of the system. And if the package system is not fundamentally aware of how the sharing works, it's not going to be able to take advantage of those efficiencies. So the package system had to fundamentally understand zones. Now, you could make the argument, well, you could have patched apt to do this, but the level of change that we would have had to make, and the having to maintain a patched version of something or hope that the upstream maintainer was going to accept our patches, it was simply too big of a risk. The other reason we did it is frankly we saw an opportunity to innovate. Right? Sun's all about innovation. And if you look at apt, apt technologically and Yum is basically just a re-implementation of the same basic concept. It hasn't changed much in 10 years. Right? So when it came out in 97 or whenever it was pretty revolutionary. The idea that you could transparently reach out over the network, full dependency resolution, single command, upgrade, all of these, very revolutionary stuff, but it hasn't changed much. Right? And as we looked at the ways that package systems have been used and abused over the past 10 years, think about in Linux all of the Linux-based things that have been built. By taking the modular structure of the distribution, whether it's Fedora or Debian, pulling it apart, taking packages, pulling those apart, making some changes, putting them back together. So there's a lot of customization happening on top of package systems, but very little understanding in the package system itself how that customization essentially reconciles with upstream changes. Right? So I don't know how familiar you are with Debian packages, but you can take a Debian package, you can make a new version of it, put your patches in. What happens when Debian comes out with a new version? You have to take your patch, you have to reapply it. Right? So we thought if we could build the notion of customization into our package system, and essentially give it a version control-like facility where you can say, I'm going to take this part of the system and I'm going to modify it in this way, and as I update with the latest upstream changes, please reconcile my changes with it. It's a very powerful thing. And we're clearly moving to position Open Solaris as a core technology for some of these higher level abstraction devices. So you've probably heard about XVM, our virtualization hypervisor product. That's based on Open Solaris. We're coming out with some storage software appliance products. Those are Open Solaris based. Right? So in terms of Open Solaris based products, the package system capabilities that we've added are absolutely critical. And finally, the last observation I'd make here on the package system is that it's not just people building customized operating systems that need customization facilities. No enterprise customer of Sun's takes Solaris out of the box and just blasts it out. They're always integrating their own customizations. Same different problem or different environment, same problem, same solution works there as well. So whenever I'm asked the question, why don't you just use apt? It's the question you always have to start with. If a technology already exists, the last thing the world needs is another one. But in this case, we feel like we're bringing substantial new innovations to the market in the package system, which, by the way, is called IPS, Image Package System. And hopefully will be ported to Linux as well. Okay, next.
How do you keep Open Solaris in sync with the Enterprise Solaris? Like, how do you decide what patches to take and what not?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I can hear you, I just can't understand you.
How do you keep Open Solaris in sync with your Enterprise Solaris?
Okay, so how do we keep Open Solaris in sync with Enterprise Solaris? Okay. So right now, Open Solaris is two things. Right? It's the code base for the parts of Solaris that Sun owns, and it's now a binary distribution that you can download and install. Right? So the code is the same code base that is in Solaris 10, which is our enterprise offering. Right? So from a code at the code level, they're in sync basically. Now that's not quite true because there's actually two branches of Solaris. There's the Solaris 10 branch, which is the released version. This is the version that runs in enterprise data centers and so forth. And then there's the development version, which is clearly there's a lot of engineers at Sun working on what's coming next in Solaris, and they're checking their code in, and that code is being built, and developer versions are being created from that. Right, so the two right now are separate, what we call trains. Right, so there's the Solaris 10 or Solaris train, and then there's the Open Solaris train. Now, Solaris 10 will continue for a very long time. It is aimed toward that top-down, enterprise data center, traditional customer environment. Open Solaris is targeted at the bottom-up, new web-scale network economy environment. Now, in the future, how will these two trains come together? Right? Will they come together by having a Solaris Next, which is based on Open Solaris? Will there be an Open Solaris with long-term support available for enterprises that want to deploy that in, the closer to the center, closer to the core of the data center? These are all questions that we're asking ourselves now. And the real question is, it's going to be 2 or 3 releases of Open Solaris before we decide how Open Solaris specifically is going to affect the Solaris roadmap. Okay.
Hello. How are you planning to deal with virtualization in the future? I've in past done software development to run on Solaris by running the x86 version under things like VMware, and I've sometimes found a lot of rough edges in terms of getting things like that to work. And is virtualization, be it under VMware or Xen or QEMU, something that you all pay much attention to?
So I didn't understand all that, but so you're asking, what are we doing to make Open Solaris work better in virtualized environments?
Yeah, that's a
Okay.
good way to put it. Under VMware or Xen or
Right.
QEMU, things like that.
Okay.
Because it makes it easier for those of us who can't buy an infinite number of computers to support multiple platforms.
Right. Yeah, so actually virtualization is a big area of focus for Sun. I mean, not only on a standalone basis, because we see a big market opportunity there, but in terms of Open Solaris adoption, right? I mean, it's no secret that Linux has better device support than Solaris does, right? And if we want developers to adopt Open Solaris as their development environment, we need to figure out how to take advantage of the device drivers which are already here, right? So as Mark Andreessen said 15 years ago, the poorly debugged set of device drivers from someone else is what we can use, right? And we're providing the higher level developer viewport and the integration facility. So we are investing a lot in making sure that Open Solaris works out of the box in VMware, in Parallels, and a variety of different desktop virtualization environments. We're making sure that it works equally well in server virtualization environments. In fact, we have a partnership with Microsoft to ensure that it works well in Microsoft Virtual Server, and also to make sure that Windows works well in our XVM, Xen-based hypervisor, and in Open Solaris, same technologies ships with Open Solaris. Right, so we're paying a lot of attention to virtualization. Another thing I'll point out is about a month ago, we bought a company called Innotech, which makes a product called VirtualBox, a free and open source desktop virtualization product. And what you can expect is that we will be aggressively moving to bring Open Solaris and VirtualBox together, so that it's not even a matter of how do you set up Open Solaris in XYZ virtualization, but the virtualization product and the operating system are delivered as a bundle, which just work. Right? So a lot of work going into that. Yes.
Do you see Open Solaris being deployed, like when you speak of desktops, on laptops? And specifically, I'm thinking of an area where Linux is really taking off right now on the low-powered laptops like the OLPC and the ePC, things like that. Would Open Solaris be appropriate in those areas?
So there's basically two answers to that question. One is from general-purpose laptops. As I just said, we do not have as many drivers as Linux does. So necessarily, we work on fewer laptops than Linux does. And that's where virtualization, desktop virtualization, is important specifically. Now, much like Linux a few years ago, if you're careful and you do your homework and you do your research, you can get laptops with all features that are supported. And really, the difference is it's really not all that different with Linux today. It's much better, but you still have to do that same kind of research before you get Linux up and running on a laptop. In terms of you mentioned OLPC, I would say that's more of a Open Solaris powered opportunity, right? Where you have a specific piece of hardware, like the OLPC or a kiosk or a server appliance. The device driver complexity when you know what the hardware environment looks like is a much easier problem to solve. And with the modular componentized structure that we have around Open Solaris now, with the new package system that has the customization facilities in it, yes, we believe that we will play a much more significant role in that space going forward. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, we got some up front here.
What about security? Do you see Linux and Solaris on par security-wise, or do you see differences, and how's that playing out?
Well, actually, I think Solaris has a slight edge at this point. They're fairly comparable, but just I think the maturity of the Solaris product, the fact that we've had a trusted Solaris product for many years, which has now been, that capability has been integrated into the core Solaris platform. It's not to say that Linux is insecure. I think it's just a matter of product maturity, to be honest.
What's the status of Open Solaris on PowerPC?
I'm not actually sure. There's been some work that has happened in the Open Solaris community around PowerPC. There's been some work that's happened actually at Sun and Sun Labs porting it to PowerPC. I know it's to the point now where they can boot it and do some basic things. So whether or not it's to the level that it's ready for users, or as opposed to ready for people to come in and hack on it, I don't know. And so that's admittedly a little bit dated information 6 months or so ago. I'd say go to opensolaris.org, and there's a PowerPC community there. You should be able to get a better answer. Okay. Other questions? No one's going to ask me when we're going to GPL Solaris? That's a surprise.
When are you going to GPL Solaris?
I'll tell you later. I'll answer that later. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.